Hello everyone, this is Josh Starr. I'm excited to try out this new system, see how everything works. I don't have a camera on my computer, and so you'll just see the PowerPoint and be able to follow my mouse. So I'll use my mouse to point out things a lot. So let's go ahead and get into it. I have Hosea 7, 1 through 8. One thing I've really appreciated about this class so far has just been to learn about prophecy and poetry and prose and how we can break the Hebrew down into bicolons and all of that. And so what I wanted to do was just to start off by looking at my English translation, where I make my breaks, and even where I would separate the sections. So I'll just read it out loud. When I heal Israel, and the iniquity of Ephraim is revealed, and the evils of Samaria, for they do deception. A thief will enter in, a band will raid outside, and they will not say to their hearts, I will remember all their evils. And now their deeds surround them, they are before my face. By evil they gladden the king, and by their treachery the commanders. All of them are committing adultery. Like an oven burning, the baker will cease to be aware, to knead dough until it is leavened. By day the king and princes are made ill. By the heat of wine he stretched out his hand to mockers. For they bring near to the ambush, their hearts are like ovens. All night their baker is asleep. By morning it is blazing as fire to flame. All of them burn as an oven, and they eat their judges. All their kings fall. There is no calling on me amongst them. Ephraim mixes himself among the nations. Ephraim is a bread cake not turned. So let's get into verse 1. It'll start right here. Karafi l'Israel, v'nigla avon Ephraim, v'ra'oth Shomron, ki pa'alu shaker, v'ganav yavo pashat gadud bachutz. When I heal Israel, and the iniquity of Ephraim is revealed, and the evils of Samaria, for they do deception. A thief will enter in, a band will raid outside. So parsing, we have karafi, which is a cal infinitive construct, rafa, with a kaf preposition and the first common singular, l'Israel, vanigla, which is a nifal. It's actually the only nifal, I believe, in this section. It's an imperfect third masculine singular of gala with a vav consecutive. Pa'alu, which is a cal perfect third common plural of pa'al. Yavo, which is a cal imperfect third masculine singular of bo. Pashat, which is a cal perfect third masculine singular of pashat. And so what we have during the parsing is I'd like to go through some of my decisions in translation at this point, because I think it's going to be really rooted in these this information. And so first is karafi. I am translating that as when I heal instead of what you may assume by a cough. It's usually used as like or as. The reason I'm doing this is because of its nature as an infinitive construct, as well as the structure of 611, which comes before, and 7-1. So it seems it is temporal in nature, and it is introducing something which leads on to the rest. And so we're going to stick with when, I think, and most translations that I saw do go with this. Vanigla, gala just means uncover or to expose or to reveal. I chose reveal simply because it's a nifal, it's a passive, and I wanted to go with something that has the most passive verbiage, because we don't actually get a direct object here. We don't know who it is that's unveiling, or even if there was action taken to do the uncovering. And so I went with reveal. Pa'alu, it's a simple cal perfect third common plural, so we translate it pretty straightforward. Key is for, so for they do deception. I know that Anderson translates it as they make idols, which is another meaning of pa'alu, which is they make. But shaker, I could not find where that means idolatry or idol. Its primary meaning is deception, and so I think it's safe to go that way. Anderson does not really defend their decision very much, and so I think it's easy and safe to just say Pa'alu Shakur is they do deception. Next is Yavo, which is which can be translated as come, enter, go in. It can mean going into a city. It can mean going to a house. It can mean many things. I went with enter in, specifically using in, for much the same reason that this textual note will suggest adding the word for house. And that is because it balances with the fact that the raiding band is outside. We want it to be clear that the thief is inside. And so I put enter in, but you could just put enter. The thief goes in, the thief comes. But I do think the balancing there is important because it does seem to be intended in the text. And last is pashat, which means simply to raid. Anderson kind of mentions raid as looting or getting the spoils of war. It doesn't have to mean that, and I think a basic translation here is probably best. And so I just went with raid, and gadud just means a party or a band, and so the band raids outside, right? So we have the danger of loss of property inside and the danger of loss of life and property outside. So let's go to the textual notes. First is A, and just to let you know what I'm doing here, I've highlighted it on the text. I've highlighted it in right here, and I've also linked it with A being A, B, B, C, C, D, D, and I've also translated the Latin because I want us to be able to, and I personally wanted to be able to learn some more of the Latin so I can read these more easily without having to reference my Old Testament textual criticism book as often. And so you'll see it in parentheses. I've translated each one. So the first is, it has been proposed that the evils of Samaria should be singular. So note that it's vera'oth, and they want to translate it vera'at, with the reasoning being that the Septuagint, the Peshitta, and the Vulgate do so. And there's a reason why we might consider that. So, vanigla, which I said is, and it will be, or they will be uncovered, and it will be uncovered, avon, Ephraim, the iniquity, the singular iniquity of Ephraim, and the plural evils of Samaria. And so it could be that this was a change made to connect it with the singular of iniquity of Ephraim, just to make it flow better. I don't think this is a change we have to make, but it does. And there's a lot in this section where there is no textual evidence, and it just seems to be a suggestion to change the text, and we would probably not want to go with it. We should note that this one does have some textual witness support. Next is dropped out half line. So hymnisticus or kist is a half line. It took me a Google search to figure that out. But dropped out half line, notice that there's really no information outside of that, and there is a question mark. What I believe they are getting at is that kind of the rules of sentence structuring and poetry and prose, they would expect there to be more here that would be in line with this line and this line. And what all they're saying is that it's possible that half of this line was lost somehow. I don't know what we're supposed to do with that, and it does seem that sometimes textual critics will try and transpose a text over here, but the BHS does not give a suggestion, so we're kind of left with the observation this line seems shorter than it should. Next is C, which is starting with Yavo, and I've already talked about this, is they suggest adding Habayita, which is house, the house. The flow of the sentence would then be the thief enters into the house, and the band raids outside. It just simply gives more flow to it. It balances it, lining up Bachuts with Habayata, which would be outside in the house. I told you how I solved this, and I think that that's a good solution that doesn't involve adding another word. Next is D, and that's with pashat, and that is, it has been proposed that the perfect they do should be the participle they are doing. In the Septuagint, ektiduskon is used, which is a participle, and so maybe the original text, this was a participle, so it would be poshet, which is they are raiding. This doesn't really flow with Yavo, and it would be the thief enters in and the band is raiding outside, but it is supported by the Septuagint, and it seems that Pesha does well. In verse 1, now we're just going to look at some grammar and syntax notes. Like I said before, the cough right here is very significant. It lines up with 6:11. So not only is it a timestamp of sorts, and I will heal Israel, but it also shows us that this is not the beginning of a thought, that the chapter number right here, which is not inspired and it's not in the original manuscripts, of course, is probably wrong to separate between these two. If you note in the BHS, they actually put this on the same line. Bashuvi Shavut Ami, which is, and I will restore their fortunes. And then also Karafi L'Israel, and which we would say when I heal Israel. So what I just make a note of here is that we're using a temporal preposition, and also that these two lines are tied together, and it proves a continuity between 6:11 and 7:1-2. Just briefly, we might note that maybe the reason why it's plural for Ra'oth, for the evils of Samaria, is that this could be a deity. Anderson hints at this, saying that it's possible that that the evil is a deity of itself and it has a divine name, and that is why it's plural. There's no real reason to assume this, but it is a helpful thought. That could be the case. So let's move on to verse 2. Uval yomeru lilvavam kal ra'atam zakarti ata sevavum ma'al lehim neged panai hayu. And they will not say to their hearts, I will remember all their evils. And now their deeds surround them. They are before my face. So this is actually a verse that I'd love to see your translation of, especially if it differs pretty significantly from mine. So just keep that in mind for if you're writing the discussion part of this assignment, that you might even give me your verse 2, just so I can see how you structure it. The problem that we're going to run into is what to do with zakarti. Is it relating backwards or is it relating forwards? I'll talk about that in a slide coming up, but I would love to see your verse 2 and see how you translated it. First, for parsing is yomeru, which is kal imperfect third masculine singular from amer. It's a very familiar verb. Zakarti is kal perfect first common singular from zakar. Savavum is a kal perfect third common plural from savav with a third masculine plural suffix. And hayu is kal perfect third common plural from haya. So just talking about my translation for a second. Yomeru, like I said, is a very common verb. We can translate that pretty easily, and it means they spoke or they said. And so I'm translating it as, I believe, they speak to their hearts, which is an idiom. And then zakarti, again, there's some trouble with where we're going to place that, but zakarti is a pretty easy word to translate. Would say, I remember. Savavum is they surround them. That's that third masculine plural suffix. They surround them. and hayu is simply they are. And so we're going to relate that to panai neged, which would be before their face they are. And again, we have to figure out who is they in this sentence. Is it the deeds? Is it the evil? Or even could it be the they from Amru or Yomru? There's only one thing that might be considered here, and actually it would solve all of our problems if only it was testified by witnesses, which it's not. And that is to add, it has been proposed to add that or surely to this verb, to this verse. And what that does is it allows us to link zakarti to, actually Rahatham zakarti together. It would allow it to link those to Yomru Lil Vavam. And the way that it would do that is by, so essentially let me talk about what we've got in this section. We have Uval and not, Yomru, they spoke, Lil Vavam, to their hearts. And what we have to decide is, do we need a direct object? Are they speaking a specific message to their hearts? Well, are they not speaking a specific message to their hearts? Or should we take this as a unit itself and say they are simply not in general speaking to their hearts? And if it is that they are saying a specific message, are they not speaking to their hearts all their evils? Or are they not speaking to their hearts that God remembers all their evils? I will fall for the latter and say that the best way to understand this sentence and make sense of it is to say, they do not speak to their heart that I remember all of their evils. And that is what this text is suggesting, is maybe we should add a key here, and I'm not sure, it's not clear if they're saying to replace kal here or to add key. If they are saying to add key, it would be weird to put it in between kal and ra'atham. Instead, I think it would belong here, but they are suggesting to add key, and what that does is it would mean uval yomeru, so they will not speak to their hearts that I remember all of their evil. It's not needed to get that interpretation, to get that translation, but it does help us to get there. So just some syntax notes is val is a very rare negation, and it might be used, according to Anderson, to make sure that we understand that this is a statement of fact, not a warning. It's an indicative use, not a precative. The saying speak to their hearts is an idiom, and Anderson and McIntosh actually very much disagree on what that idiom means, though the end result is very similar. So Anderson proposes that it means to speak honestly. And so what he would understand this passage as saying is they will not honestly admit that God knows all of their sins. While McIntosh translates it as to reason. And so they will not reason that I know all of their sins. I think it's best to go with Anderson, and for several reasons, especially that it just seems to fit the passage better. They did not reason only works well if you have a specific idea in mind, even if zakarti doesn't belong on this line, but instead belongs with the rest. I think the idiom stands strong if it means to speak honestly. Also, I was trying to search through BDB to see if it had some list of the way that this idiom is used, and I couldn't find anything. What I did find is speaking to his or her heart, and that means to speak tenderly or endearingly, and that convinced me a little bit more that maybe this idiom is talking about honesty or openness or trueness, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and go with they need to speak honestly. Though I did just leave the idiom in, I did just translate it as speak to their hearts. I would say that this is to speak honestly, or to even to accept as reality. And then lastly, what is the direct object of zakar? Again, this is what I would love to know your answer to, is Would you put zakar with atah, or would you put it with kal ra'atham? So there's a few ways to translate it. One would be, they will not speak to their hearts all their evils. I will remember now. Their deeds surround them. They are before my face. The reason I didn't go with that is because it does not fit the parallelism and it doesn't fit the line structure. Note that this is all one line and this is the other. And that's not always a perfect explanation, but I think it helps. But with this, you have parallelism between I remember all of their evils and they are before my face, as well as they will not speak to their hearts and their deeds surround them. And Anderson points out that Hosea will often leave out a vav consecutive, just a vav to connect things, that we seem to need to translate well. So sometimes Hosea will just leave out a vav. And so in my translation, I went ahead and added vav here. And I translated it as and now. And the reason why is because I think that we are transitioning, that this is a turning of the phrase. So it goes, I will remember all their evils, and now their deeds surround them. They are before my face. It just is to acknowledge that there is a change between these two lines. While they are together, they are two separate entities. Verse 3. Bara'afam Yasamaku Melech Uv Kaha Shehim Sarim. By evil they gladden the king, and by their treachery the commanders. The parsing is simply one word. It's Yasamku, which is PL imperfect, third masculine plural of Samak. What we have here is simply the word for to gladden or to rejoice. I decided to go with gladden instead of rejoice, and the reason why I did is because I think it's fair to the context to make sure that we don't translate in a way that makes the king a knowing engager in evil, because the king is going and the commanders are going to be set up as the targets of evil, not comrades in evil. And so I think the king is not actually rejoicing in evil, but he's being gladdened by evil. And let me be clear, what I'm saying is that we should understand the bait here as not saying that the king is gladdened by the evil. So evil is not making the king glad. The king is being made glad under the motives of evil, under the context of evil. So what we'll see in a verse or two is that the king is poisoned by wine, and so is the commanders. And so what we would understand is that they are not gladdened by the evil, but gladdened by the wine, and the evil is that it is poisoned. And even if this is figurative, which I don't think it is, we still have this understanding that the king and the evil are not, the king and the commander are not engaging in evil, they're the victims of evil. So let's go to the textual problems. So this is an interesting one. Probably anoint. So we see here the probable reading for them is Yimsaku. So note that that's a switch from Samak to Mashak. What we have here is glad or rejoice, and what we have here is anoint. This would allow them to say, with evil they anoint a king. And the problem, besides there not being any manuscriptural evidence here, is that Hosea seems to be making the king a victim, not a benefactor. This is not a king who is being anointed by evil men because he is evil. This is simply a king who is already in place, who is being a victim of evil. That seems to gel with the context so much better. And I actually really like Anderson's explanation, so give him a read to understand where I'm coming from here. Some grammar and syntax notes is the conjunction of king and princes through the passage indicates the court or royalty in general. We see it here, Melech, Sarim. I'll point it out later. But these two go together, and it's not meant just to be simply the king and a prince or the king and some commanders, but just in general the royal court. And Anderson supports this interpretation too. I think I've already covered this part, that so the former would connect the evil with both them and the king, right? That would be to rejoice. But to translate it as make glad is due to the victim role of the king and the prince. They are the ones poisoned with wine. So verse 4, and this is another one that I would love to see your translation of and your interpretation of. So in your discourse that we are assigned to do, I would enjoy reading not only what you translated this as, but also how you interpret it. What is the metaphor supposed to be saying? Because I have a specific take that I don't think is exactly where Anderson is, and it's also not where the ESV is, but it is, I think it's merited by the text. I'd love to see yours as well. So, kulam, excuse me, I have bronchitis, and so I'm coughing a little bit. Kulam ma'anafim kamo tanur boera me ofe yisvoth meir milush baek batsek ad hum tsa to. All of them are committing adultery. Like an oven burning, a baker will cease to be aware, to knead dough until it is leavened. Alright, so let's look at the parsing and my translation. Mena'afim is PL participle, masculine plural from na'af, which you should recognize from literally all of Hosea. Boera is cow participle, feminine singular of boer or ba'er. Yishboth is cow imperfect, third masculine singular of savat. Meir is hifil participle, masculine singular of ear or ear or ur. I do not remember what the probably or. Milush is cow infinitive construct of lush, losh I believe, and humsato, which you can tell I'm having trouble pronouncing, is a cow infinitive construct from chamatz. So, just looking at what I translated, we first have mena'afim, which is to commit adultery. The PL here, I believe, is just simply intensive. It just means that it's to commit adultery, to pursue it. It's a participle, and so I translate it as they are committing adultery, I believe. Let's look. Yep, committing adultery. Next is boera. You should get used to this term. We're going to see it quite a few times. It's a cow participle, feminine singular from ba'er. And simply what it means is to burn. And so tanur, which is again another word you should know because this passage uses it pretty often, is oven. And so an oven burning. I use it almost in an adjectival sense a little bit, just simply because that is the way that it seems to be set up, is the oven is burning. Next we have yisboth, which you should recognize as savat, from where we get Sabbath. And that is a cow imperfect, third masculine singular. He, the baker here, Opheh, ceases. And what I want to point out here is just, it greatly impacted my translation, was to note how these three, and even four, this verb right here, how these four verbs interacted with each other. Because Hosea is putting three verbs together with nothing in between, which is kind of unique. So for me, I think the easiest thing to translate was to understand, okay, to cease. So he has ceased. This is the imperfect third masculine singular. It's an active verb. And then the next is a participle. And so what is he ceasing from? Well, he has ceased from being aware. And you might have translated that as stirring. I am with Anderson on this one, that if you look at BDB, it very rarely, if at all, is translated as to stir something or to stoke a fire. Instead, it is often referring to stirring to wakefulness, or even to being awake or alert. And so what I have translated as is to be alert. So he has ceased from being alert. And I agree if you have some trouble with putting a from there, but I think from context we have to understand that this verb is leading this verb in some way. So he has ceased from stirring or being alert. And what is he ceasing from being alert about? I would argue that he is ceasing from being alert about the fire, the burning oven. Why? So I am going to translate this. It is a hifil participle, masculine singular. I'm going to translate it. No, it's not. It's a cal infinitive construct. To need. The reason why I'm doing this, again, it goes back to my understanding of what the metaphor is supposed to mean and what it's supposed to be. But the reason I'm doing this is it's an infinitive construct, and it makes sense to put to there. And so he has ceased from attentiveness so that he can to knead. And he's going to knead the bread, or the dough, batsik, until it is leavened. And that, you might note, look at this, 3 hapax legomena. And so we have one right here, ophe, which is a difficult verb. Noun. You might translate it as an epha, or the measurement, or you might translate it as a baked thing. I think Anderson is onto something where he translated it as a baker, because it is doing a lot of action to be a inanimate object. The next one is yishvoth, which to me is surprising that we don't get this anywhere else. Savad is a pretty common word. And then humtsato, again, struggling to say that one. That is no surprise. That is a very unique word. Next, we have A, B, and C. First is A, and that comes after manafim. It has been proposed to change the word from they all commit adultery to a form of the verb they are all angry. So that's right here. They want to change it to own theme, which is to be angry. I really like what Macintosh has to say about this. Is, again, note that there's no witness evidence here. This is seen as inappropriate in the context of a conspiracy, requiring restraint rather than passion. So that's Macintosh. I think that that's a good way of rebutting this. Next is perhaps insert as an oven from verse 6. So if you'll just let me do this, I'm going to go ahead and wait to comment on this until we get to verse 6, because that will be the only textual note in verse 6. But just note where it's referring to. It is saying right here. So they all commit adultery. Here, we'll go to our translation. All of them are committing adultery like an oven burning. So right here we have like an oven burning. This is what's being referred to in the textual note on verse 6. Just note that. Next is B. It has been proposed that the feminine ending of to burn might actually belong to the nominalizing mame at the beginning of baker. So this is interesting. Again, doesn't have any textual support, but it's an interesting conclusion that kind of softens the difficulty of translating meofa, because that's a very interesting word, right? It's a hapax legomena. So what they're saying is the original text read boer, and then here's the hey, and here's the mame, haim, not chaim, ophe, which would form the word heat. So their argument is it was not a feminine, and it also was not a nominalizing MAME. Instead, it was like an oven burning with heat. An ephah. And I don't know if that actually solves anything for us when it comes to this strange word, but it is a suggestion. Last, it is possible that the final phrase of this verse is actually a gloss to add to verse 6. And that's going to actually have a lot to do with what the note on A, the possibly insert into verse 6. Possibly insert from verse 6 has to do, is that maybe this comment here about a baker who is ceasing from attentiveness, maybe that is an explanation written into the text for verse 6. So we'll comment on that briefly when we get to verse 6. Next, let's just look at some grammar and syntax notes. So the baker lacks a definite article. As you know, right here, there's no hey there to make it definite. That's not a perfect support for why I think it's non-literal, and I think it's not a literal event, but it's a metaphor. But it's interesting. Anderson definitely takes more time explaining the literal possibilities than the non-literal. But when he explained their non-literal, I was pretty much convinced, and I think that that's a great way of understanding this passage. So I would suggest that you look at Anderson for an explanation of the non-literal possibilities on 453, paragraph 2. I hope that our pages are the same. So going back to my kind of discussion on Meir, ESV applies to stir, to the fire, essentially stoking the fire. So what does he cease to do? He's ceased from stoking the fire. And Anderson applies it to the dough. So what does he cease to do? Pay attention to the kneading of the dough. I would disagree with both, which leads me into this slide. So we're going to take a look at the oven metaphor 3 times, which just shows how important it is to the section. Excuse me. So first, like an oven burning, a baker will cease to be aware to knead dough until it is leavened. The first option, and this is the ESV translation, the baker stops stoking the fire to knead the dough. So he stops stoking the fire to knead the dough. The problem is that what would be the meaning of the metaphor? Because most of this text refers to an increase in the burning, an increase in the danger. If he had to be stoking it to keep it going and he ceases, the metaphor loses really any coherent meaning. The second, and this is proposed by Anderson in page 456, though it is difficult to tell if they hold to such a view, is the baker neglects to knead the dough. So a baker will cease to be aware to knead the dough until it is leavened. They mention that just like verse 8, this may mean that he gives a faulty or defective product. Also, they mention that this could be a literal act of going to sleep at an inappropriate time to allow the assassination attempt or the at least whatever the event actually is to occur. One of the weaknesses is they are not compared to the baker. If he's non-literal, this does not make much sense because the emphasis on the baker means that the metaphor of an oven loses a lot of meaning. The third option that I prefer is that the baker neglects the fire to knead the dough, which I think I laid out the textual reasons I believe that. Is the meaning of the metaphor is that they've been left to their own devices and have raged out of control. And I'm not sure if it's in lust, though, because of they all commit adultery, or conspiracy, considering they poison a king, or wrath in general, which it seems to be a theme, especially of fire throughout the Hebrew Bible. The weakness of this is that the identity of the baker remains unclear, because if the metaphor is meant to say that they've been left to their own devices, we have to ask the question, who has allowed them to rage out of control? Is it God or the king? I have an answer. It's not perfect, I'll admit, but we're going to see it in part 2 of this slide. So let's move on to verse 5. We are halfway done. So here we have Yom Malkenu, Hachelu, Sarim, Hamath, Miyayin, Mashak, Yado, Et Lotzim. On the day the king and princes are made ill, by heat of wine, he stretched out his hand to mockers. So what we have here is Hechelu, which is a Hifil perfect, third common plural from Hala. Mashak, which is a cow perfect, third masculine singular from Mashak. And Lotzim, which you may have noticed, is a Polel participle, masculine plural from Litz. We are going to have 2 rare stems in our section today, and this is the first one, Polel. So let's just talk about my translation for a second. We have Hechelu, which means to make ill or to be ill, and because it's a Hifil, I'm going to interpret that as to make ill. It's causative, to make ill. And then Mashak, which means to stretch out. And I think we can translate that pretty simply. He stretched out. The reason I put it in past tense instead of in the present, he makes ill, is because I do think that Yom here, whether or not the textual note is right and there needs to be a bait, or if there's not, this is establishing some sort of time frame. The day that this happens, he stretched out his hand. Or we could also read it that this all occurred because he stretched out his hand to mockers. Last is Lotzim. It is a Polel participle. Polel, you should translate the same as you translate a PL. The difference is because it's with a biconsonantal, and it sometimes gets weird with those when it comes to the PL stem, the Pual stem, and the Hith-Pael stem. We're actually going to see the Hith-Poel later on in the section. So it's a participle, but I think it's taking on a very noun-like form. Anderson would agree with me that it is mockers. Leets is used often in the Proverbs to indicate scoffers or mockers, though I would argue that I think that this verb is taking on a very strong judgmental tone. It's not as light as scoffer can sometimes be in the Proverbs. Sometimes it is strong, and I think that that's the case here. Next, in verse 5, in the textual problems, there's a lot of them. But good news is we only have this section and then 6 left. There's no textual problems on 7 or 8. At least in the BHS. Maybe there are textual problems. So first we have A, which starts with Malkenu. It actually starts with A at the beginning of the verse. I did not highlight that, but it's Yom Malkenu. And that is, perhaps a bait preposition was lost by scribal error, and the third common plural pronominal suffix on king was changed to a first common plural pronominal suffix. The problems they are addressing are there's 2 of them. One is Yom. In your translation, you might have been stuck on this for a second just to ask, what is the role of day here? Because usually we'd expect Bayom, right? In the day. Or just something to add that temporal flair of this is the day of what? This is the day when what occurred. And yet we don't get that. And so they are suggesting that it's possible, and the Targums do seem to support this, that Yom originally did have a bait and lost it through a scribal error. If you noted in my translation, I actually do add what would amount to a bait preposition on the day. And then the next part is changing this first common plural to a third common plural. I looked into why they might be suggesting this, and I think part of it is simply that the hour seems inappropriate for the context, considering the only first person we've gotten in this section, and even I would argue it's not in this section, it belongs to the section before, is in verse 1 with, verse 2, I will remember. And so this isn't God and the people's king. And it seems odd to bring the Hosea into this as well, since he does not seem to be present for any of this section textually. And so it is strange to see our king here, especially since our doesn't appear very often. In fact, them and the king are united twice in other places. In verse 3, king and them are right next to each other, and in verse 7, it just explicitly states their king. So I think this is something that we might have to consider, especially it is supported by Targums, and it does make sense, both of these. I did not change. Actually, did I change? You know what? I actually skipped it all entirely. That was a mistake. I would suggest to you, and in my translation on paper, I do write our king because I think it is supported by the text. But like I said before, I did add on the today. Letter B is hechelu, which is a difficult word to pronounce as well. And what the editors of the BHS would suggest is that a few manuscripts give to begin. And we have the usual suspects. We have the Septuagint, the Peshitta, and the Vulgate. And so note how similar they are. So we have a segol and a composite segol. And here we just have two seres. So the difference is minimal. And so we see that instead of to make ill, they are to begin. So the translation would be, on the day our king began. They began. It's odd, and I don't exactly see the purpose of it. I go with Macintosh and say the reading is just unlikely. And the Masoretic seems more trustworthy here than the Septuagint and the Peshitta and the Vulgate. Next, we have C, and that's related to Sarim. Actually, it's not. It's the C here and the C here. It's related to Hamath, Mayim, and it's perhaps the reading is their heat instead of the heat of wine. I wrestled with this, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but it seems to be indicating Hamatham instead of Hamath Mayayin. And so I actually think that all three of these may be related. I might be reading it wrong, and if I am, in the discourse section, just let me know. But all three of these seem to only work if all three of them are true. So taking out wine here, and the variant reading to hand is note CFEE. So the variant reading to hand is related to what the textual note is for E to E, which is right here. I didn't highlight that E. I missed a few of those, and the A right here. Mashak Yado. Well, what's the variant reading that they're saying? They're saying perhaps reading he mixed his wine, which would be note that that's a change from Mashak to Masak, and note that that's a change from Yado to Yeyino, which would be his wine. And so putting it all together, and again, I might be wrong here, but I think that what's being argued by the editors here is that all three of these go together. They're just different in relation to where they occur in the text, is a very different reading. On the day our king and commanders are made ill with their heat, with their poison, he stretched out he mixed his wine with scoffers. Now that's a very different reading of the text, but it does have... Sorry, no, it really doesn't have any witness support that I can tell. So let's go ahead and move on. I'd be interested if I'm missing something here for Dr. Mosley or one of you guys to let me know, because it does seem like a very strange change. And it's odd that it's separated as C, C, D, and EE instead of just as one length. So just let me know if there's something up with that I'm missing. So some grammar and syntax notes is, it is likely that the bait preposition was lost to a describable error. Essentially, I'm just going to argue that I think that the bait may have actually been needed. And even if it's not, we still probably should translate it as on the day, considering Yom here has to serve a time frame purpose. So let's go ahead and also mention the Polel stem. All I'm saying here is that you should translate them as PL, and that if you want to know more, I learned what I know about it from Pratico and Van Pelt's Basic of Biblical Hebrew. So verse 6, another oven metaphor. If you like that, you get another one. So ki, kervu, katanur, libam, ba'ar, bam, Kal, Halela, Yashain, Ophehim, Boker, Hu, Boer, Kaesh, Lahava. For they draw near to the ambush, their hearts are like ovens. All night their baker is asleep. By morning it is blazing as fire to flame. So parsing, there's only 2 verbs for all of these words. So the first is kervu, which is PL perfect, third common plural. And the second is boer, where is that? Right here. And that's a cal active participle masculine singular from ba'er, which is, again, a very popular term in this passage, used twice, I believe. And it means to burn, and karav means to draw near. I have translated it as to bring near for 2 reasons. The first is it is PL, and the second is that it is an ambush. And so I think contextually, they are not drawing near to the ambush because they are the ambush themselves, but they are bringing near to the ambush. And then boer, again, I'm going to translate it as simply as possible as an active participle. It is burning. It is right here. So let's go to the textual problem. Like I said, this is the last one. So perhaps transpose after in his anger in 4a. So what's interesting about this, and remember I told you I was going to comment on it back in 4, is that what they're saying is that perhaps 6a, which is katur, which is as and like an oven, should go after anaphim in 4a. So let's go back to 4 and just look at what they're saying. Here, kulam mana'afim katanur kumo tanur boera. So what would that look like? It would be they all commit adultery like an oven. So here, all of them are committing adultery like an oven burning, a baker will cease to be aware. I find that strange, and maybe they are hinting at that it should only be in 4a, since it already kind of exists in 4. But possibly they're arguing it should be there twice, and here no times. I hate to leave us on a sour note, but I do not know what is being said here, especially RWGZHWN. It is unclear to me what the BHS editors want me to understand from this, and so again, in the discourse part, just let me know what this is supposed to mean. Maybe we'll need Dr. Mosley to explain. but I genuinely do not understand it. So hopefully you guys can help me out there. So let's turn our attention back to the oven. So for they bring near to the ambush, their hearts are like ovens. All night their baker is asleep, by morning it is blazing as fire to flame. The baker's inattentiveness returns, right? So let's look. All night their baker's asleep. So the last time what we saw was that he was ceasing to pay attention to the oven. This time he's asleep while the oven is burning. All night their baker is asleep. By morning it is blazing as fire to flame. So what's blazing? The oven. Their hearts are like ovens. By morning it's blazing as fire while the baker sleeps through the night. So the result of the baker's inattentiveness returns, right? So last time we just saw that he was inattentive. Now we see that his inattentiveness leads to a blazing as fire to flame, which I love that, that phrase, as fire to flame. The results are also left unclear. So did the bread burn if there's bread in the situation, or is the house on fire? Anderson hints that there could have been a proverb this is all based on, where the inattentive baker sleeps while the oven catches his house on fire. That's a leap considering we don't have the proverb, but it does seem set up in a way that might be possible. So here's my suggestion. The inattentiveness relates to the king who has allowed idolatry and possibly participated in wickedness. And where do I get support from that? Well, most of Hosea has been critical of royalty. It's been critical of idolatry throughout the land. It's been critical of the not carrying out of the law. And then we also see that later on that these are the people whose kings have fallen and who consume judges, meaning a vanishing of law and order and justice from the land. And the second part is the ambush is related to the blazing of the fire, and the one brought near is the king who is inattentive. So this is a very vague metaphor. For some reason, Anderson has a good explanation. He gives 3 reasons why it may be inattentive, so I would encourage you to look that up. But what I'm going to say is most likely is this ambush is for the king, or it is for the court, or it's for a higher up of the government of Israel. Their hearts, this is the conspirators as still, are like ovens. So all night the baker, the king, is inattentive. By morning, he's burned. That's my interpretation. I, again, would be very interested in yours. It is a difficult metaphor, but if we get it right, I think it's a very powerful message. Verse 7, all of them burn as an oven, and they eat their judges. All their kings fall. There is no calling on me amongst them. Oh, sorry, I forgot to read the Hebrew. Kulam yehamo katanur va'akalu et shoftehim kal malkehem nafalu ein kore bachem eli. So let's just read it again. All of them burn as an oven, and they eat their judges. All their kings fall. There's no calling on me amongst them. And there's actually a lot of verbs in this one. So first is yehamu, which is kal imperfect, third common plural of hamam. The second is va'akalu, which is cow perfect, third common plural of akal with a vav consecutive. The next is, you may not have even counted this in your parsing because we take it as a noun, but technically it is a participle. It's shoftehim, which is their judges. It's an active participle, masculine plural. And nafalu, which is a pretty easy one, is cow perfect, third common plural. And kore, cow active participle, masculine singular. So let's just briefly talk about my translation. So yehamu is... sorry, let me go back. I want to make sure. Okay, yeah, so it's a new word for burn. I was pretty sure it was. All of them burn as an oven. So yehamu is a new word for burn, not boer, which we've been using. And we're just going to translate it as easily as possible, which is a cow imperfect. We're just going to say all of them burn like an oven. Especially, we should translate it this way because we have a comparison here. So all of them burn, that's just a general statement about them, a state of affairs, like an oven. Va'akalu, which is they consume. Now, I believe I've said they eat. That is maybe more literal, but if we're comparing them into an oven, I think we have the support to translate this. And they consume, especially for English readers, we don't think of ovens as eating anything. We could think of it as fire consuming things. And that is exactly what's meant here, is that it's being, to use very basic language, it's gobbled up, it's eaten up. So consume. And they consume. They're judges. There's that active participle that we take as a noun. They're judges. Kal, Malkehim. Remember I mentioned that Melech and they are related a lot. Here it is, Malkehim, their king. Sorry, they're kings. I think it's their kings, yeah. Nafalu, which is simply they fall. And then last is Koreh. Ein Koreh, Bahim, Eli. There is no crying out, active participle, so crying out, amongst them upon me or to me. And remember, there's no textual notes, so we're going straight from verse 7 to verse 8. Ephraim ba'amim hu yithbolel. Ephraim haya una bali. Hafukah. Ephraim mixes himself among the nations. Ephraim is a bread cake not turned. So here we have the other strange stem, which was very fun for me to discover. I had two rare stems in my section. Yithbolal is a hithpoel, which is an imperfect third masculine singular from balal, and just like the polel, the reason why we use this instead of a hithpael is because it's a biconsonantal. Actually, this is a geminate, isn't it? The textbook that I was using and referencing, the Predico Van Pelt, doesn't mention it being used for geminates, but I think it can also be used for geminates. The next is haya, cow perfect, third masculine singular, should stand as pretty common to you, pretty easy. And hafukah is cow passive participle, first feminine singular from hafak. So the way I'm translating it is yithbolal, that's a hithpoel, which we translate similarly to how we would translate a hithpael. And so he mixes himself. I translate it as a middle because that seems to be the context of the passage. It's not that Ephraim has been mixed into the nations. The exile in the prophecy so far, the exile has not seemed to happen, especially in this section. And so I'm going to translate it as he's mixing himself by alliances and by political affair and even religious compromise. Next is Hayah, which is simply he is, and so Ephraim is a bread cake. And then Hafukah, which is not turned. Beli right there. That's a rarer negation. Beli, not turned. You could say not turning, but I think what we understand from the culture of what this oven is, this tanur, is that this is not something that is rotating often and quickly, like, let's say, a rotisserie chicken or something. Instead, it's being flipped like a burger. And so what is being said is that he is, I believe it's Macintosh says, this isn't that he's just weak on one side. It means that he is burnt on one side and raw on the other, unusable either way. One grammar note is just the hithpoel stem, and I would point you to the Pradico Van Pelt, and the hithpael is how you translate that. And the last one is the oven metaphor, part 3. He is a bread cake not turned. He's mixing himself among the nations. Is this related to the previous metaphor? I don't think so. Instead, I think it is merely a continuance of imagery. Hosea seems to be doing something where he's using the same kind of imagery to build on each other, even if each individual reference isn't related, like very strictly. So I would say that, yes, he's using the same imagery. He's continuing with the oven theme. No, this is not a continuance of the discussion from before. And that's what I want to show you here is this is how I divide the text. 6:2 to 7:2. Anderson calls this the priest's crimes, and I think that's pretty fair. Is all the way from 6:2 down 6:11 would end with when I restore their fortunes, and we'd say when I heal Israel is part of that. And then we switch to the conspiracy to kill the king. And I know that I've said that it might not be the king himself. And we aren't told exactly that it is, but it seems royalty is somehow a target of some sort. And then lastly, 7:8 doesn't refer to this conspiracy at all. Instead, we see something that will be a big theme in the next section, which is Israel has made political alliances. There's a international situation. So let's just talk about application for a few seconds. First is God knows every sin we commit, whether we hide it from others, plan it in secret, or refuse to admit it to ourselves, and yet he is still determined to restore us. That's my central idea of the text. And the reason why I go with that is because the first thing we find out is the iniquity and evils are revealed. That Samaria's evils and Ephraim's iniquity will come to light. God knows, and he will expose their sin. Second is they will not admit their evil, but God remembers them. Or, alternately, if you translate it like I do, they will not admit that God even knows, which we're going to affirm God knows. The conspiracy to eliminate the king did not escape his notice. For all their craftiness, for all of their planning, for all their plotting, God still knew. Their lack of prayer is evident to him. God even knows what they're not doing. He's aware of what they're leaving out as well as what they are doing. Their political and religious mixing is also known to him in verse 8. And so what we see is that God is not unaware or shocked or even taken aback because they were hiding it for so long and then eventually it came to light to him. From the beginning, God knows our sin. And yet, all of this is in context to the verse 6:11 and 7:1. He will restore their fortunes. He will heal Israel. The exile will end. And so my point is that God knows our worst moment, even if it hasn't happened yet, and yet he is still determined to save us through Christ. And that is an amazing truth. So Christotelic application, first is, when we see Israel's kings, we ought not to just shove Jesus into them as if Jesus is those kings, but instead to take a Jesus as the end of the Old Testament approach. We can say Jesus is a king that's not conquered or deceived. So when we see Israel's king who has allowed sin, who has been unaware of conspiracy, unaware of deception, who is subject to treachery, subject to lawlessness, Israel's king can be assassinated. Israel's king can be unaware of what the people are doing. Israel's king can be taken by surprise. And we can see Jesus is the divine king who reigns supreme and will not be surprised or defeated. The nations may rage, but Jesus will be king, and he will not be conquered. And the second thing is, at the very depths of our sin, we can take heart that while we were still sinners, Jesus died for us and healed us of our iniquity. So some general applications for us is, let the fact that God knows all that you are doing help you to resist temptation. I think it's very helpful for us in temptation to say, God sees me right now. God knows what I'm doing right now. Because we can be much more comfortable in sin if we think we're getting away with it. we're very much more eager to sin in dark, in hiding, than in light. And so it can be even a comfort to us when we're wrestling with temptation to say, God sees me right now. The next thing is, let the fact that God is determined to save you in spite of your sin encourage you to trust him to the end. And that's one thing that we see in Romans 8, we see it in Jude 1 and 24, is that the God who has decided to save us in spite of our sin is trustworthy to get us to the end. That we can trust him, we can endure to the end in confidence of the Lord because he saved us in spite of our worst moment. He saved us in spite of our worst everything, our sin, our betrayal, our refusal to acknowledge him, all of it. God has seen that, God knows that, and he has decided and determined to bring us to salvation and to him and to eternal life. And then third is something that I may not have taken away if I wasn't reading the book I am. I'm reading Calling on the Name of the Lord, which is a biblical theology of prayer. And he points out that calling on the name of the Lord, that phrase is really important throughout the Bible, especially the Old Testament. And so when I saw it here, I just thought we should mention that God points out that it's not right that they weren't calling out in prayer to him, that they weren't relying on him, trusting on him, making petition to him in the midst of injustice, in the midst of instability. And so I would say cry out to God when injustice is committed, even if it's you who's been committing it, because he already sees and knows, and we've already seen that he is willing to forgive. So that's the end. I hope that this has been helpful. I look forward to reading your discourses and seeing your videos. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here.